All right. I'm Bob Van Heuvelen. I'm a lawyer. After 42 years in Washington, I can say without a doubt the government can be there to help you. And you're supposed to laugh at that. Like what Jim said about Wall Street, it's true in Washington, D.C. too. The money is there. My job as a lawyer, my job as a lobbyist is regularly to help people try to find it. The government truly is here to help. I wanted to talk real quickly about some of the things that are going on in Washington with a real keen eye towards some of the opportunities that you all can confront in the context of your business. I wanted to talk briefly about some of the things you've been hearing about, the tax cuts. You've been hearing about infrastructure a little bit. You've been hearing about health care, and you've been hearing about some of the problems that the country has. And the opportunity you have in dealing with Washington is that in the context of all these problems, in the context of the legislation that's being confronted, in the context of the money that is there are opportunities, and unless you go and ask it, it won't come to you, I can assure you that. In the context of the tax cuts, for instance, did you know that in the Senate there is a provision in the Senate Finance Committee bill that is being marked up as of 3 p.m. this afternoon that will actually tax your stock options at vesting, not when you cash them in, at vesting. How many of those of you out there have stock options that have vested, but you haven't taken them in yet? Yes, exactly. Guess who's got a dog in the hunt in Washington, D.C.? The Finance Committee starts marking. They started talking this morning or this afternoon at 3, and they start marking up tomorrow morning at 9. In the infrastructure bill, there is not an infrastructure bill yet, but if the president has failed on health care reform, which it looks like he has at least so far, and if in fact the tax bill doesn't work and there are massive differences between the House and the Senate, the next opportunity for major cash is an infrastructure bill. And do you all have any interest in trying to figure out how you define infrastructure? We have a client in our firm who's trying to find school construction assistance. We have some people who are really very interested in trying to find money for internet taxes and for support for different kinds of structural efforts. If you can start defining the word infrastructure, which is not defined in the dictionary, you'll start understanding how you might fit your square peg into that round hole. When you look at what's at stake in Washington, in the 2017 budget, which has just concluded October 1, there were $500 billion in federal grants. There were $500 billion in federal procurement, and what we call tax expenditures in the amount of about $1.3 trillion. And what does that mean? That means if you have an interest in any of that, if there's a way to fit the requirements of your particular business into what might fit into a Washington priority, then in fact you have an opportunity to work with the government. Here is just a little suggestion. You can see what's happened here with respect to grants. The blue line the blue-green line in the middle charts the grants over time, and the yellow yellow line charts contracts in the government. It's really, and other federal assistance is the big purple line. If you start trying to figure out what you're trying to accomplish, does the government have a program, or more importantly, should it have some dog in this hunt? Is there a way for its priorities to coincide with your priorities? That's one of the things that Washington can help you do. The same thing in the context of procurement and contracts. In 2017, there were almost $500 billion in federal contracts. In the way that we track them, the Defense Department had the lion's share of $262 billion, the Department of Energy, $27 billion, the Department of Health and Human Services, $25 billion. As you can see by looking at the chart, the money in the United States government is very stovepipe by program. but so too is your business. What are you trying to accomplish? And if in fact it's a cross-cutting kind of an effort, I was talking to Laura before, she's going to present tomorrow before the conference tonight, and she was talking about executive training and helping workforce folks. That's a cross-cutting issue, Laura. And there are human resource budgets across federal agencies. And I'm sure if you're dealing with high-tech issues, there is cross-cutting. Brian Sager, who's going to present tomorrow, is in our audience tonight. He's one of our clients. We've been helping him find contracts and grants for his remarkable search engine. It's not a single stovepipe. We've gone to the Department of Health and Human Services. We've gone to NIH. We've gone to the National Science Foundation, and we're helping to try to find money. We're trying to find money in the Homeland Security budget. We're trying to find money in the Department of Justice for another client. The Department of Transportation has $6 billion. The Treasury Department has $5 billion. Long and the short is, it's just sitting there. There are programmatic direction, of course, associated with each of those. And in fact, if you have an idea, you have a request, we can help you funnel the request. If in fact you have an idea for which there is not money, we'll help you try to fashion that provision of federal law. The biggest giveaway program right now is the tax expenditures. And tax expenditures are what you otherwise would know as deductions and credits. Do you want to start getting involved in that? Well, of course, you start looking at how do these sort out. Some of them are very, very big, like the exclusion of employer contributions for medical insurance premiums. Well, nobody here is probably going to be moderating on that particular issue. And the top 10 go down in pretty significant numbers. It's hard for a small entrepreneur to start dealing with, in fact, the very, very big ticket items. I don't propose that that would be something you would do. However, what we try to do is at the margin on very small issues. There is a tax bill. There is going to be a tax bill that's going to be considered. It was just passed out of the Ways and Means Committee in the House last week. It's going to go to the floor of the House this week. The Finance Committee has things going on right now. What do you wish, what do you hope that the United States government would try to help incent with respect to your business? And that's one of the opportunities that you have in Washington. As Jim says, the money is here. Let's try to fashion it. Let's look at how Washington works. Well, if you're like me, you took civics, and in 5th grade you find out how our laws are made. You know, I'm a member of Congress, I write a bill, I introduce it, I get to send it to a committee, it has a hearing, maybe it gets marked up, maybe it gets passed, it gets sent to the floor of the respective body, passed, not passed, probably passed, and then goes on to the other house, or sometimes just lost. That is how it used to work. That's not how it works anymore, because in fact, there's such dysfunction in Washington, D.C. I know that becomes a shock to all of you, but it really is completely dysfunctional. But the mistake you make in New York City, the mistake you make in this community is to assume that it is totally dysfunctional and that nothing happens, because of course that's not true. Because what really happens is you have to go and find oh, Bobby, anyway, I'm doing a terrible job here. I don't want to go to this. What you really have to do is try to figure out what is a must-pass bill. What has to happen. And so right now, there's a tax bill being considered in the House, there's a tax bill in the Senate, and you've got a tax idea. Your bill is not going to get prime time. It's just not. It's not going to happen because there's so much dysfunctionality. If I'm the member of the Congress and I like your bill, almost certainly I have somebody on the other side of the aisle who doesn't like me or wants my seat or covets the position or needs to protect the majority or wants to make sure that person is set. So what you really need to do is you need to fashion a strategy to get into the must-pass bill. So assuming and knowing that it's dysfunctional does not guarantee what is going to happen. What do we do? And I'm sorry for the PowerPoint. I'm having a hard time. The first point, what do? You identify your outcome. It's like all business ideas. What's your goal? What is your goal? How are you going to take an evaluation of what the risks are. What are the downsides? Well, this member who's the chairman of that committee doesn't like that particular idea. Or in fact, there's not a bill that's moving forward right now. Or the president hasn't yet embraced an infrastructure plan. Or he said it was going to be $1 trillion infrastructure plan. It would be first priority. It hasn't come up yet. Oh, he just changed his view. Well, there are lots and lots and lots of moving targets. There are in business as well. There surely are in Washington. And what do? We try to figure that out. What do? We try to figure out who our friends and our foes are. Our big job when that big bill is moving and it has to pass, it's either a tax bill or it's a debt ceiling bill or it's what we call a continuing resolution or a CR, then you have to figure out who your friends are. You don't need in the House of Representatives 218 members of Congress to support your idea. You need one. It'd be nice to have two if you could get a Republican and a Democrat. It'd really be nice to get four if you had a Republican and a Democrat in the House and in the Senate. And it'd really be nice if you had a way to try to figure out how to neutralize the people who might otherwise not like the idea or wouldn't make it a priority. Try to figure out who else in Washington or in the countryside is going to be your friend. How do you do that? You look, they're what we call NGOs, non-governmental organizations. There are people, there are associations across the board. There are, associations of state treasurers. There are associations of group purchasing organizations. There are associations of executives on all sorts of fronts, and there are non-profit public interest groups. You try to marshal all of them, and you go try to talk to them, and you bring them to bear on the issue, and then you finally talk about the messaging. How do you get the messaging going forward, and how do you do it in a consistent way? You can't count always on just a lobbyist doing it. Oftentimes you need to have somebody else doing it. We called earned media. You know about earned media. You get your stories in your local press. You have letters to the editor. You go in and do a public event with a member of Congress, or you get one of the administration officials to come to your plant or to your facility, and you start getting that all organized. Let me give you a few anecdotes, because that's what might stick as you start thinking about it. Right after the Affordable Care Act was passed, you may all remember this. The Democrats got it through because they had 60 votes. They had a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, and as soon as they got the Affordable Care Act passed, Senator Kennedy died. His seat was flipped to a Republican, and they didn't have 60 votes anymore. And so the Democrats couldn't pass bills on the health care anymore because the Republicans declared it to be their cause célèbre. And so one of my clients came to me and said, "Oh my God, there's a mistake in the bill as it was written." Our client was a dialysis provider, and under the dialysis provisions of federal law, after you are able to stay on your private insurance if you get end-stage renal disease for 30 months, and then after 30 months you have to go to Medicare. That's great. That's great for you if you're under 65. Regardless, you get to go on to Medicare. It's not so great for the dialysis providers, because guess what? They do better under private insurance than they do under Medicare. And so the law says you get to be on private insurance for 30 months. That's great. Guess what? It was left out of the Affordable Care Act with respect to these new health care units that were set up under the law. And our dialysis provider said, "Fix it, Bob, fix it." Well, you know what? We weren't going to fix it because the law wasn't going to be amended, because guess who didn't want to amend it? The Democrats didn't want to amend it because it was going to go down in flames, and the Republicans didn't want it to be brought up because they were going to look bad, and so therefore it wasn't going anywhere. So what did we do? We found champions, 2 Republican senators and 2 Democratic senators, and what we tried to do was we worked with the general counsel of the Health and Human Services Department. We said, "Can't you give us an opinion that in fact this is really an error in drafting, and in fact it's actually not even an error in drafting, it's actually intended to be memorializing current law," which of course was a bunch of what. But reality was there was a strong public policy argument for it, because the people who were in fact in the new healthcare units really required this, and we made a compelling argument. We said to Kathleen Sebelius, who was the Health and Human Services Secretary, if you can't deal with this privately, we'll have to deal with this publicly. And so we had a very private meeting. Senators brought rubber hoses, and they worked her over. And the reality is, lo and behold, the general counsel changed his mind, and next thing we knew, we had a general counsel's opinion, a new regulation that allowed this to happen. Was it an amendment to a law? No, it wasn't. But did it get the problem solved? Yes. Another idea, we had a client walk in, and they were sorghum producers, and they wanted to be accorded treatment under EPA's renewable fuel standards. So they, in fact, could get their sorghum feedstock used by the biodiesel producers. Guess why they wanted that? That's their best market. The cows eat sorghum, people don't. And if you could add that to the renewable fuel list of available feedstock, they would have a ready-made market. They asked us to work on it. We tried to figure out what the limitations were. There were analytical problems with the EPA staff. There were data problems, and we put the data together. We sat down with the scientists for our client, and we wrote the 50-page petition for review. We organized a bunch of lawyers to come in and tell EPA that if, in fact, they weren't able to move on this constructively, that, in fact, we were going to be litigating the matter. And we had 3 different feedstocks we wanted approved. We got 2 of them done. In the energy field, let's see. Another energy issue. We had an electric vehicle client. They were manufacturing, manufacturing batteries. And they were sort of the key issuer of the standards for batteries in the electric vehicle space, right before everything started popping in electric vehicles. And the question was, what can the United States government do to support you? Well, these are small guys. It was before Tesla became the most valuable car company in the world. No one knew about Tesla, and what did we do? We went into the Finance Committee and we said, we'd like to support these people. And the question was, how can you support them? We said, well, how about a tax credit to support the purchase of each of these electric vehicles? And the Finance Committee staff director, a good friend of mine, said, Bob, go to hell. We're from Montana and we don't care. And so I said, well, we'd like to try to figure out a constructive way to work it. And so we went to Lamar Alexander, who drives a Prius, and we went to a couple other senators on the Finance Committee, and we got a bill put together to give a $7,500 tax credit to every purchaser of electric vehicles. Now, they capped it at a number of cars, and we're getting close to the number from 2008. So this is one of the issues that's now on the table again in the current Finance Committee markup. But lo and behold, my client said, well, all well and good, nice for you to build the market for electric vehicles, but we manufacture charging infrastructure as well. Is there anything you can do? So I went back to the well, and the suggestion was, isn't there some tax mechanism you can do? And so we came up with this notion of an investment tax credit. So as you, the homeowner, or you, the building owner, or you, the public infrastructure holder, spent $1,000 on a charger, you got immediately a 30% immediate investment tax credit. We got it through the Finance Committee. Did that help the manufacturer of the charging infrastructure? You bet. It was very, very helpful. Or another one, we had, in the context of what was commonly called the doc fix. Little known, when the Congress acts, they have to have pay-fors. Pay-fors meaning if we're going to give something away, we got to get something back. At least that's been the budget rule, maybe not including today, but that has been the budget rule. And so in the context of fixing the doc fix, because the doctors, every one of the members of Congress has a doctor whose Medicare reimbursement rate was being artificially capped because it was a budget mechanism. And guess, when the doctors saw the members of Congress, guess what they said before? They said, how are you feeling, Senator, Congressman? They said, by the way, my Medicare reimbursement isn't doing very well. So it becomes a real high priority issue for a member of Congress. I want to have a good doctor's appointment. Long and the short is they decided to modify the Medicare reimbursement rate, and by doing that, they had to come up with a pay-for. So one of the ideas was, we had a not-for-profit community health plan had retained us. And one of the proposals on the table was, well, not-for-profit community health plans, like Kaiser Permanente, don't pay taxes on their premiums. And so one of the suggestions from one of the smart members of Congress was, well, let's tax the premiums of the not-for-profit health plans. We went into the Finance Committee. We argued about how close the margins were. We took the data analytics on that particular business, and we persuaded them to stand back and not tax our client. Did it result in a absolute result that they loved? Well, it was called no extra pain. So, long and the short is, the suggestion was there is money to be had, and the way to get to it is to go through our little business, and we would love to help you if you can. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Yes, go ahead.
Very interesting presentation, thank you. Is strategies a lobbying firm?
Yes. Yes, yeah. I mean, in New York, you evaluate your popularity by your stock price. In Washington, it's by your polling numbers. And we've done polling data on our professions. You know, if you're a banker, you're in pretty good stead. If you're an undertaker, you're a little bit lower. If you're a lawyer, you're lower yet. And then if you're a lobbyist, you're right at the base. And that's where I am. So I'd be happy to talk to you. You might give me some tips. My understanding is you get taxed on that stock when you finally convert it. That's what we're. I think the question becomes what evaluation. The question is what's the black letter law on the taxation, and we'll get you the exact provisions of the law.
You have an answer.
There's a true difference. When you're given stock, you can either pay taxes on it then.
Right, or on the appreciate.
As income, or you can wait, and when you sell it, it's ordinary income.
Right.
Okay? So you're talking about vesting, correct?
Yes.
So vesting is completely different than getting a capital position. So pay the taxes when you get it, have capital gains when you sell it.
Right. But the point of the proposal that's on the table today is to quote raise revenues, which on vesting, yeah, and that's a problem for you all. Or yes, one more question. The medical device tax, I believe, was removed, but I think the medical device manufacturers are worried right now that it's going to be used as a pay-for in the context of the current tax bill. Because the budget resolution that was just enacted allows the Congress to add $1.3 trillion to the deficit, and if they go anything over that, they've got to find some pay-fors. And the medical device tax, reinstituting that is one of the ideas that's on the table. There are 350 amendments on the Senate Finance Committee agenda. If you look on the website tonight, you'll see 350 amendments. A lot of them are bogus, they're fake, they're empty, but there are a lot of good ideas just waiting to be voted on tomorrow.
Have you ever had any experience in copyright law in government?
I haven't done any copyright law. We're doing a lot of patent litigation. I've got a pharmaceutical client that's been right in the middle of. You may have read about the efforts of some of the generic pharmaceutical companies to challenge patents held by brand manufacturers, and we're right in the thick of that because there's a real serious conflict of laws. The prevailing law in pharmaceuticals has been the Hatch-Waxman law, which has been in place for 30 plus years, and it was Orrin Hatch and Henry Waxman, and that gave presumed protection of patents on brands for a period of time, and then the generics could challenge. The innovators on a wholly different part of industry came up with something called the intellectual property review in the patent and trademark office. So now we have relatively different procedures for exactly the same kinds of patents, and they're being challenged. So my client has been literally sold its patent to the St. Regis Mohawk tribe to try to protect it. And you can only imagine how much fun that's been. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you have any guidelines on the size of deals that you work on? And what would be too small for you?
Well, my rule, I think, is sort of like the bigger the better. But no, I have two rules in my little business, and they've held me in good stead. I've been in business now doing this for 10 years as a consulting firm, and that's if I like the people and that's one, and that's the most important thing. And two, if their mission is noble, that's the second thing. And those have been the two touchstones of what we do. I mean, for instance, Brian Sager's first idea when he came to me was he had the most innovative patents with respect to solar panels you could imagine. Instead of doing all sorts of rigmarole and multiple processes, he used a printing press to send out literally, it looked like newsprint except it was solar panels. It was both innovative, he's an incredibly nice guy, and smart as hell, and it was going to do something terrific for society. That's what he did. He's come up with another really great idea now with respect to his Google on steroids proposal, which you'll hear about tomorrow, which is just a phenomenally powerful deal, which is going to transform your research engines in all of your businesses. So that's my rule. Yes, sir.
Two comments. First, as a pro bono, why don't you help all the small broker dealers, investment banking firms, who want to fit in there, deal with the finance committee and staff members, see if we can get over our backs. Secondly,
Well, we do pro bono, but it's pro bono with an equity position.
well, they pay well as directors fees.
And, yeah, well, we do that too.
And second,
We're flexible.
okay, you're from Light.
But I'm from the government, I'm here to help, remember? Yeah.
As long as you give a political contribution.
Well, that helps.
And
Remember, money is the mother's milk of politics. Let's just never forget that.
that's absolutely somebody said a long time ago.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Does your firm actually write the legislation and we get the earmarks in the bills with the LAs?
We can write the legislation. Oftentimes, members of Congress like to have what they call legislative counsel write it so that they don't have the fingerprints of a dirty lobbyist all over it. That's one of the best ways to really undermine a piece of legislation is when you have somebody who's could be designated a hired gun. I think of them as public advocates, but you might think of it as a hired gun. Yeah, we will help draft. We obviously draft talking points. We draft the legislation. There's something called an earmark, which is a dirty word now in Washington. It used to be the way that Washington got, members of Congress got money for their favorite universities or for their favorite bridge or for the, necessary flood control projects, good, bad, or corrupt. That's how it was. Now there are more sophisticated ways to do it. It's odd because in this Congress, and this has been primarily a Republican initiative, they like to think the bureaucrats should make those allocations as opposed to elected representatives. So we write the legislation with directives, and on the appropriations bills, you give directives, you can write letters. We help form the coalitions to try to get it done. Yes, ma'am.
How do you rate the Jobs Act in relation to how it's helped?
The Jobs Act, meaning the tax bill that's in under, I think it's ridiculous. I mean, right now, the silly part is if you're a taxpayer in New York State, helping taxpayers, you're going to lose your state and local tax deduction. Is that going to help you? I mean, for an individual taxpayer, it's going to be ridiculous. In the circumstance where there's a real strong demand for jobs, we're in the most sustained improving time in the country's history, And is there a real argument for adding more fuel to the fire, more debt to the budget or to the national debt? I don't know. I'm not sure it's as targeted as it should be. I think there's time for each of your businesses. There's a way to focus a tax advantage to help you. Do we need the kind of massive tax cuts? They estimate the benefit of this will be an extra $2 trillion in the national debt because they're not going to pay for it. I think that the overarching effect is dangerous because I think we're right at the tipping point with respect to the national debt that is very concerning. And so somewhere along the line we have to deal with those issues. Doesn't mean you don't advocate for a partisan position for your particular client, but it means you do it responsibly. Any other questions? Yes, sir, in the back, in the red tie.
In Nevada, we have no state taxes, so if this passes, you can all come to Nevada. Cost of living's cheap, weather's perfect, and we have no taxes.
And you have no taxes.
Yeah, but Harry Reid lives there, right?
But Harry Reid is no longer in the Senate. Yeah, right.
Who cares?
Yeah, right. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Laura.
Tennessee.
Laura?
Yeah, as a Washington insider, I'd love to pick your brain. I must know the government really well. Two questions real quickly. How many people work for the U.S. government? First question. Second question, how concerned do you think the U.S. government is in thinking ahead of attracting and retaining the older generation of workers out there to work for them?
I don't know that we can research that, Laura, the number of employees. I mean, I used to work at EPA. We had 18,000 employees. The Department of Justice, where I worked before that, I think there were 12 or 13,000 employees. The Defense Department, I think, has several 100,000 employees. Health and Human Services Department, about the same. When you start looking at the federal workforce, I would imagine it's totaling close to 1 million people. Are there sound personnel regulations and policies in place to recruit and retain young people? You and I could discuss that. The Office of Personnel Management, which runs those kinds of things, has been challenged historically with wise management of personnel. And so I would suggest that in your business we should take a look at OPM and try to figure out how we could style a program, a pilot program. Let's go to one agency and try to do a change there to try to figure out how you could do it. This young man who works with me, Bobby Cunningham, who's in the back and will be here all day tomorrow, Bobby is not even 25 years old. Should he be the kind of person who's helping the United States government get to its goals? He's smart, he works like the devil, and he's the kind of person who's got insight and he's bright. Are those the kind of people we want to retain to be our public servants? I think so. Do we have the kinds of policies in place? Probably not. I mean, I'll just tell you, I was the head of the Justice Department's Environmental Enforcement Program for a number of years. I was making at that time $140,000, okay? My son-in-law just had graduated from Harvard Law School. Guess he went to not the best law firm, he went to a pretty good law firm, and immediately he was making $175,000 a year. He was a brand new baby lawyer. I'd practiced law for 30 years. Do you think that's the kind of way you're going to incent smart young lawyers to stay and work in the public interest? I would say probably not. Salary is not everything, but I would think people who work on Wall Street probably think money might be a motivator. So I'm just saying. I don't know why I think that. I know I'm the only one standing between you and the bar, so I don't want to go too long. Yes? There's a second on that motion. Are there any other questions? Yes. Call the question, yes. I hear motions. Is there a second? All in favor? Thank you.